Mexican drug cartels smuggle huge amounts of illegal substances into the US each year, including cocaine, heroin, marijuana, and methamphetamines. They often believe they can operate with impunity, getting away with their large-scale crimes through blackmail, coercion, and even murder of those who might oppose them. But standing in the cartel's way are the brave men and women of the US Coast Guard, who do remarkable work to protect the extensive coastlines and maritime borders of the US to limit the influx of illegal drugs. And one Coast Guard ship, the cutter James, recently proved just how effective this branch of the US Armed Forces can be. Over the course of a more than 112-day mission, the cutter James seized an extraordinary amount of narcotic substances and put multiple cartel traffickers behind bars. This is a look at how it all happened from start to finish. The cutter James and its crew left their home port of North Charleston, South Carolina, on a multi-phase deployment mission in the Eastern Pacific, with crew members involved in an array of counter-narcotic operations, supported by members of the US Navy and fellow Coast Guard units. For the first 2 months of the mission, the James worked in support of the Joint Interagency Task Force South, JIATFS, patrolling the waters of the Coast Guard's 11th District area of operations, which encompasses the states of California, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, and also covers the vast expanse of Pacific Ocean off the western coast of Mexico. Much of the cutter James' crew's time out on the water was spent planning and patrolling, being attentive to the tiniest of details and watching the waves for any signs of suspicious activity. This is what a lot of Coast Guard work involves. Its members must be internally vigilant and attentive, constantly surveying the ocean waters and coastal landscapes, using all their training and their instinct to spot and respond to the strategic and often stealthy activities of the criminal cartels they face. Coast Guard work also demands a huge amount of patience, as crew members may go days without any signs of criminal activity, but have to be ready to burst into action and strike when the moment comes. And on January 5, 2025, that moment came for the crew of the cutter James. The ship's crew was using an unmanned aircraft system, a drone, to fly high above the waters and enjoy an aerial view of the Pacific Ocean. They were looking for anything unusual, any unidentified vessels or signs of smuggling activity. Around 260 miles off the coast of Ecuador, the drone team spotted a suspicious vessel and immediately charted a course to intercept it. The Coast Guard later shared a video showing the interception in action. The video shows the cutter James's boarding team traveling out towards the vessel, which was covered in blue tarp to hide its contents and its crew. The Coast Guard members had no idea what was waiting in store for them, but had plenty of firepower in support, with manned machine guns keeping a close eye on proceedings, ready to rain down fire on any criminals who might emerge and pose a threat to Coast Guard personnel. The boarding crew eventually arrived beside the vessel, and crew members start to pull the blue tarp away, revealing a large number of suspicious containers all lined up along the center of the boat. Then, several Coast Guard members climb on board, quickly aiming their weapons towards the other end, where the 3 members making up the vessel's crew were hiding under the last bit of tarp. The Coast Guard personnel order them out, with their hands behind their heads and then onto the ground. Finally, they remove the last section of tarp and begin examining the contents of the vessel, uncovering more than 2,025 pounds of cocaine. The narcotics were seized and the 3 suspects apprehended. A good haul and a great day's work for the Coast Guard, but their incredible efforts and accomplishments were far from over. In fact, the very next day, they celebrated another success, even bigger than that of the previous day. On January 6, a patrol aircraft spotted not 1, not 2, but 3 suspicious go-fast vessels not far from where their previous vessel had been found, around 280 miles off the coast of Ecuador to be precise. Go-fast vessels are so called because of their ability to travel at rapid speeds, helping smugglers evade capture. It can be tricky, therefore, for the Coast Guard to catch them, as they aim to make a quick getaway as soon as the smugglers spot anyone in the area. To intercept powerboats like these, the Coast Guard has to be smart and strategic in its approach, especially when multiple vessels are involved, as they were in this case. Fortunately, the crew of the cutter James were ready to respond, rushing out to the scene to simultaneously intercept all 3 of the vessels, without letting a single one escape. They were aided by supporting units, including unmanned aircraft systems, UAS, and Coast Guard helicopter interdiction tactical squadron aircrew. Again, the Coast Guard later published videos online showing the smugglers in action as well as their eventual capture. One video shows the smugglers tossing containers of cocaine overboard without realizing that they were being observed and filmed the whole time. This is a common tactic, as the cartels can simply drop the drugs in the water, then rapidly sail away without detection. Other vessels can then come along at a later time or date to collect the containers. Fortunately, in this case, it was the Coast Guard that ended up collecting all of the illegal substances. The videos show one of the vessels trying to speed away, tailed closely by a US helicopter, as well as Cutter James boarding crew members making their way onto one of the vessels and ordering the 3 suspected smugglers on board to put their hands in the air. This turned out to be one of the best days in recent Coast Guard history. Once all the seized drugs were weighed and tallied, it was found that close to 14,000 pounds of cocaine had been collected. What's more, 9 suspected drug traffickers were captured. Another success, another huge haul, and yet the Cutter James's work was still not done, and once again, the very next day was about to bring another huge victory for the forces of justice. On January 7, a maritime patrol aircraft spotted another go-fast vessel. This one seemed particularly suspicious due to its low-profile shape, which would allow for a particularly speedy getaway. It was spotted around 330 miles off the coast of the Galapagos Islands in Ecuador. And once more, there's amazing video footage showing the vessel itself as well as the incredible moment of its capture. The vessel was long and narrow and clearly capable of reaching an impressive top speed. This was demonstrated when, upon seeing a Coast Guard helicopter close by, the vessel's crew decided to try to flee. They sped away but were no match for the chopper, which was forced to fire several lines of warning shots into the water. Seeing this, the crew must have realized that they had no chance of getting away, and that they were likely to end up on a sinking ship, or worse, if they persisted. Eventually, they made the right choice and stopped their boat. The 3 crew members then emerged from below, sitting on top of the boat and waiting to be taken away. The video then shows the Cutter James boarding team once more arriving on the scene, pointing weapons at the suspects to prevent any possible escape or counter-attack before climbing on board to inspect the vessel's content. As suspected, this was another smuggling vessel, with another large quantity of cocaine on board, more than 8,240 pounds of it to be precise. This was all seized by the authorities and the 3 suspects were apprehended. In total, that makes more than 24,000 pounds of narcotics seized and a grand total of 15 suspected smugglers, all in just 3 days. Those are some very impressive statistics, especially considering how much damage those drugs could have done, how many lives they might have affected or ended had they made it to the US or elsewhere. But the Cutter James crew had no time to celebrate their achievement. They, along with their fellow supporting units from the Coast Guard, Customs and Border Protection, the Joint Interagency Task Force, and even the Ecuadorian Coast Guard, had to get straight back to work on the hunt once more for additional smugglers in the area. And they had several other big wins in the days and weeks that followed. On January 11, for example, the US Customs and Border Protection Air and Marine Operations aircrew spotted another of the go-fast vessels. This one was around 270 miles off the coast of Ecuador, in a similar area to the others captured earlier on. And like those others, it seemed suspicious due to its appearance and location. The Coast Guard personnel knew it was likely to be another cog in the cartel's drug smuggling machine, so quickly deployed teams from both the Cutter James and the US Coast Guard Cutter Stone. A helicopter team from the Cutter Stone arrived on the scene to stop the smugglers making any attempts at escape before the Cutter James's boarding crew arrived and interdicted the vessel. Another 3 suspects were apprehended and more than 3,385 pounds of cocaine were seized. 1 week later, on January 18, the crew of the US Coast Guard cutter Mohawk found another suspicious go-fast vessel. This one was closer to land, just 185 miles off the Ecuadorian coastline, and this time the smugglers weren't willing to comply, nor did they want to stick around and wait for the Cutter James crew to take them in. They attempted to flee the scene, tossing their bales of cocaine overboard to lighten their load and speeding from the scene. But the Cutter James team had no intention of letting any smugglers get away. A small boat team from the James chased after the go-fast vessel, covering many miles of water, while the Mohawk crew worked to retrieve the jettisoned drugs from the water. Eventually, the James boarding team caught up with the go-fast boat, putting an end to the suspect's great escape attempt. All three of the suspected smugglers were once more apprehended, and once the drugs had been gathered and weighed, it was found that nearly £6,000 had been seized in total. Less than 2 weeks later, the Cutter James team was back in action. The ship's UAS crew, using drones to scour the waters from the sky, spotted several go-fast vessels around 380 miles off the coast of Peru. The James's boarding team made use of surface use of force tactics to interdict one of the vessels, with another trio of suspected drug traffickers captured and more than £3,870 of cocaine collected. The Cutter James's hot streak continued just a couple of days later, on February 1. Again, the drone team spotted a go-fast vessel, this time 280 miles off the Ecuadorian coastline. 2 days later, they repeated the process, halting the activities of another drug smuggling team and go-fast vessel, over 200 miles from the coast of Peru, with close to £3,500 of cocaine seized. Time after time, the Cutter James crew displays strategic superiority and agility, spotting suspicious vessels, hunting them down, and seizing their content, not letting a single smuggler escape. And with each successive victory, the impact of their efforts grew, and the total amount of drugs seized continued to increase. Then, on February 15, the final big victory of this incredible mission came. A Customs and Border Protection aircrew spotted another suspicious go-fast vessel, this time 260 miles from Costa Rica. The James deployed a helicopter crew, which had to open fire near the vessel to force it to stop, as the crew had attempted to make a quick getaway. With the boat halted, the James crew simply sailed up beside it, climbed on board, and captured 4 suspects, plus close to £3,880 of marijuana. For the rest of its time at sea, the Cutter James took part in an intensive naval training event called Carrier Strike Group 12, Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group Composite Training Unit Exercise, or COMP2X for short. COMP2X is the Joint Forces' most complex integrated training event, designed to prepare those involved for sustained periods of combat. It demanded all hands on deck, round-the-clock commitment from the crew of the Cutter James as they trained beside US Navy units like the USS Winston S. Churchill and the USS Gerald R. Ford, demonstrating the full power and remarkable capabilities of the Coast Guard. Once the training event was complete, the Cutter James returned to the US to offload its seized cargo and return home to Charleston. Captain Thomas Rodsevich, commanding officer of the Cutter James, shared his pride at participating in the event. The Coast Guard's integration in exercises like COMP2X is so important because it simulates realistic threat environments and high-stress situations, allowing members of the Carrier Strike Group to practice complex tactical maneuvers, communication, and decision-making under pressure. One of the Coast Guard's statutory missions is defense readiness. With that comes supporting the national military strategy and Department of Defense movements and operations. Captain Rodsevich was also thrilled with the results of the James's counter-narcotics operations, summing up his feelings in a statement. "I couldn't be prouder of the James crew and the teams who embarked with us to stand the watch over the holidays to keep our borders secure and keep Americans safe. Over a remarkable 72-hour period, our crews interdicted 6 go-fast vessels and 1 low-profile vessel across the vast ocean, culminating in the extraordinary seizure of over £24,000 of cocaine and 15 suspected narco-traffickers." And the stats become even more impressive when looking at the full quantity of drugs that the Cutter James helped to seize. In total, the patrol resulted in 11 interdictions across the eastern Pacific Ocean. 34 suspected drug traffickers were detained and taken ashore to face federal prosecution. It was later found that they had links to a range of transnational criminal and foreign terrorist organizations, including some of the most notorious drug cartels like the Sinaloa Cartel, the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generacion, and the Clan del Golfo. As for the drugs, more than £44,550 of cocaine were seized, plus the £3,880 of marijuana from the final capture. This was all taken back to the US and offloaded in Port Everglades, Florida in early April. Experts estimated that the total value of the drugs amounted to almost $510 million. "In all my years working on this vital mission, I've never witnessed such substantial results in such a short amount of time," said Rodsevich, and he wasn't alone in sharing his pride at such a significant achievement. The US Attorney General Pam Bondi stated, This is a key example of the Department of Justice working with our law enforcement partners to fight crime and keep drugs from flowing into America. Meanwhile, MOHAC Commander David Ratner explained just how important patrols like this are. The fight against drug trafficking and transnational criminal organizations doesn't begin at our US maritime borders. Our efforts to defend Americans at home begins with denying drug traffickers access to maritime routes. There's plenty of truth in those words. The closer the drugs get to the US border, the greater the chance becomes that they'll be successfully smuggled onto American soil, leading to even further criminal activity and drastically increasing the risk of lives being lost and innocent Americans paying the price. By stopping the supply of drugs far away, sometimes hundreds of miles away from the US coastline, the tireless teams of the US Coast Guard save lives, stop crime, and keep the country safe. Much of their incredible work goes unnoticed and underappreciated, but reports like this show just how big of an impact they make. The report should also make cartels and other drug smugglers think twice about further actions of this kind. As Bondi summarized, this is a major blow to their financial operations and their efforts to distribute drugs around our country. It's an example of a prosecution-led, intelligence-driven approach to stopping these criminal enterprises in their tracks. Nathan Moore, the Vice Admiral of the US Coast Guard, also had some choice words for the cartels, issuing a bold statement. "We own the sea. You do not. We will find you. We'll hunt you down. We will stop you." Of course, smuggling activity won't just cease overnight in the wake of this news. The cartels simply make too much money. The US government estimates more than $13 billion per year trafficking drugs over the US border, so won't want to give up on such lucrative opportunities. However, a blow like this will certainly dent the cartel's operations. It represents a serious financial loss for them, as well as a clear reminder that they cannot get away with whatever they want in the waters of the Pacific Ocean. Even as they work to construct new go-fast vessels and experiment with sneakier strategies to smuggle their illegal substances closer to the coast, the Coast Guard will continue to stand in their way, stopping and intercepting them at every opportunity, following the shining example set by the cutter James earlier this year. So what's your take on this story? How do you feel about the stellar work of the US Coast Guard, and in particular the crew of the cutter James? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the Military Show for more up-to-date news and information about military operations in the US and abroad.